This one's going to go a little faster.
Mm-hmm.
And we are live. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Learning Integration. We are going to talk about Module 5 of the ACE course at this point. I'm joined here at this moment by Suzanne. Before we go into introductions and get started, I want to just take 1 minute to talk about copyright. Please allow me to share my screen real quick. So all of us here graduated from this course called the ACE program, ACE standing for the Accelerating Coaching Excellence Program. And we did this in 2022, becoming an enhanced practitioner. And so we have permission to discuss these things and also use them in our practice. But the original copyright, I want to be very clear about this, lies with David B. Peterson and a 7Path Forward LLC. So these are the authors. Please respect that. We are discussing this here. But it is used with permission. So again, this lies with these gentlemen. That's their copyright. Thank you. So Suzanne, nice that you could join. I know it's bright and very early for you. Maybe not bright yet, but very early for you.
Oh, we are getting there. The days are getting longer in the north.
Good, good, good.
Yeah.
So Module 5, what stood out for you in general in this module?
In general, it's really the action taking focus at the end of the session to solidify the insight that came and applied in the real world. So I think that was the main point for me.
Yeah, because a lot of coaches mistake this huge intensity that comes with a breakthrough aha moment in a coaching session with the belief that this thing is now going to magically change that person's life. It doesn't really work quite that way. We need to kind of make plans and give conscious thought to how are we going to integrate this into our daily life, into our way of thinking. And so awareness, planning, and accountability in a more general sense. So this module was entitled "And Strong." And so I think that was a very fitting way to describe it. So do you have specific things you want to jump to very quickly, or shall we kind of go in order as it was presented?
Let's go in order. I do have my notes here, but it helps me sort of to keep track, and I think it's easier to follow sort of the flow because they put a lot of thought into it, how to present. So yeah, I wouldn't mind just going.
Okay, so the first thing that they kind of touched on was again the five levels of need, and they immediately jumped into this idea that whatever goals that you specify and want to keep moving forwards towards should be based on needs and not solutions. And for me, that kind of made sense because needs are very intimately linked to your values. They are essentially what brings the values, which are very often more abstract notions, more into the realm of the practical needs and limits and things like that. What was your take on that?
Absolutely, just dovetailing on the going deep last module, where the intent was to find the issues that tackles or maybe rubbing with identity, values, and beliefs, because those are the drivers of our behavior. And those are the hardest to change because they are so deep integrated. And often we are not, it's not in our awareness. So how do you change patterns that you might have had for decades? And being then intentional and finding as well sort of the Goldilocks. We don't want to make changes too big too fast. But yeah, stack them, get anchors to be aware, observe yourself, reflect upon what worked, what didn't work, and have a concrete plan when to enact your new insights or whatever you want to practice. And yeah, just practice and don't expect it to be perfect the first time. Yeah.
Right,
It
right.
is a process.
Very, very rarely in life do these things just happen in a heartbeat, and all of a sudden the new frames for which you view something just make so much sense that it just rerouted your whole behavior and thinking patterns. And you touch on something very important here, which is the whole concept of unlearning. And that's sometimes the hard part. You might be very motivated and passionate about integrating these new things, but you're so stuck in your very often subconsciously triggered acts of behavior and thinking routes that it is sometimes not that easy to just even remind yourself that, hey, oh yeah, I wanted to do this differently. So it takes some maneuvering, and I always think that it's like this massive tanker ship on the ocean that's just cruising along with all its mass, and that comes along this little itty bitty tugboat trying to push it, of course, right? It's quite a difficult undertaking. It might take some time to do so. So goals in terms of needs versus solutions. The needs are so tied to intrinsic motivation and values, again, like what we said before. And usually they are very clear cut because we feel it, and it's very specific and kind of natural to us and our context when we really dig down and get to the layer of needs, versus in order to meet that need, a solution or solutions might be very varied. You might get to the satisfaction of certain needs any number of ways. And sometimes it's much tougher to hold on to any one of those specific solutions, because it changes, it's variable depending on changes of context and stuff like that, versus the needs are often much more anchored.
And maybe just to expand a bit more in terms of needs, I mean, our brain keeps us safe. So the needs might come from an area, or our limbic system perceives certain scenarios, certain situations as threats, and then we condition ourselves to see the world and act in a certain way. And those are the deep ingrained, then subconscious pattern. So to change those, yeah, first there needs to be awareness, the insight, and then, as we said in a previous recording as well, it's the practice and repetition to move from a certain automatic pattern to something new.
Yeah. And again, that takes time, and it's not always going to go smoothly, but it's all part of the process. And I think we should all kind of cut ourselves some slack as we go through transitions of change like that. And on top of it, sometimes it might even be uncomfortable, even if what you're after is very positive and something desirable. Change by its very nature is uncomfortable. So it's part of the process, nothing wrong with it. It's just a price to pay. So in terms of a for us coaches, and I'm going to quickly share a screen here just for 1 second. There was just that the important question to ask here is, at the end of the coaching conversation, how confident are you that your client would complete everything they agreed to? So how confident are we that things are going to be enacted and integrated? And I think coaches should really think about that and have at their disposal a wide arsenal of tools and techniques that they can deploy depending on the client, because every client is different. And for instance, in the group, during the live session, some people said, well, I might have the client summarize their action steps, write them down. I might help them by sending out reminders and things like that. And just try to very verbally get a commitment out of the clients. But that stands kind of against like all the things that can derail even these best laid plans. Very often, stress, lack of time, a feeling of overwhelm, and just crises. And again, the whole things of fears and comfort zone issues that we grapple with anyway as it comes to change. So, we try to help the client get and build a foundation upon which he or she can remain accountable.
When I think as well, it's at the end of the session, there's some insight and something that's desired to change. And then there's the plan. With goals, and goal setting is a whole beast in itself. So finding the right goal and then having a plan that the Goldilocks rule, right? That pushes you enough out of the comfort zone that you still feel safe and it's attainable. And you are getting out of your comfort zone, because otherwise there's no change. And this stretch zone is so individual, and I think that's something at the end of the coaching session, really to be clear: where's your comfort zone where nothing would change? What is stretch, and what is too much?
Yeah.
That it's overwhelmed, that you might not even start doing it. So finding it, and then as well, I think giving the power and assuming the client, if they want to change, they do it. And asking what would help you, instead of me assuming I'm contacting you because that's helping you. There might be different things they need in order to succeed.
Yeah, it should be kind of a co-creation of this combined effort. And one big part of it, I think, is, and I'm sounding like a broken record, is this normalizing the sense of discomfort.
Yeah.
Because a lot of us do give up as soon as it becomes uncomfortable, and it's just something to be expected. So I think that is there as well. Also, I think it helps to help the client to assume a more growth mindset oriented approach, meaning stay flexible, experiment, adapt. Even best laid plans don't always work out the way that they were there. We are not there chiseling it in stone, but it's yes, a strong guideline. It's not something to be just nixed, at the drop of a Yes, menopause moment here. Lost, but I did not find a word. In any case, new approaches should be experimented on, and be prepared for that. Be prepared for that. Always look for ways to facilitate this transformation. If there's really some blocks that put themselves into your path, that you kind of graciously learn to move around them and nevertheless move forward. So I think that really is kind of the triad. On the one hand, the insight that starts it all off, the plan, the commitment to accountability that comes with it, and then this idea of being able to experiment and keep a growth mindset as it goes. I think most people would know about growth mindset versus fixed mindset. A lot of it got popularized by the works of Carol Dweck. She has a seminal work called Mindset, very aptly named that way. And so the fixed mindset would be to say that, whatever is. And it is preordained, it is not changeable. I am who I am today, and I'm going to be the same tomorrow. And if stuff happens, it was kind of like fate, and I have no control, and things like that. And very often, they stressed in the course that people like that do take feedback personally, because if somebody gives you feedback about you could potentially improve in this area, if the person thinks that they are fixed in their abilities, then that improvement would never come, which then becomes quite hurtful. In contrast to that would be the growth mindset, where we are continuously growing and evolving. We develop, we improve. And very, very big one is that mistakes are just a source of learning. Meaning, whenever something goes wrong, don't see it as a failure per se, but just something that gave you data so that you can do it differently and maybe better next time around. And in that sense, feedback is seen as valuable. All of a sudden, if somebody then tells you the same thing, you might be able to improve by changing this and that. It is an actual welcome kind of constructive statement. And everything then becomes an experiment. Did you want to add anything to this, Suzanne?
No, I think that's great summary. What really stuck from a different concept with me is similar in terms of taking life as an experiment and its constant practice. And yeah, there is no mistakes or failing. And see fail as first attempt in learning. That really stuck with me and helped me to shift my mindset.
Yeah, it's and again, normalizing failure, normalizing the discomfort of failure and trying, and the sense of potentially being stuck, and the sense of frustration.
And I think even using the word failure has such a negative connotation that you are subpar, or whatever, your output did not reach the goals. So what other words are there that could be used? Right?
Like growth opportunity, developmental opportunity. That's a mouthful there again for you.
Yeah.
and so more in a positive spin.
Yeah, and that's something I try to be conscious about, not to use word failure. If somebody reports that something did not go that way, then right away shift, okay, so what did go well? What strengths did you use? If you would be in a similar situation, what would you do differently? Where would you notice that things might not go the way you want? and not just failure. That's yeah, it has to me, it's just people shut down easily. And how can we avoid to keep people learning and growing?
And just to state the absolute obvious here, it's not that people are a failure. It's that there was an outcome that ended in failure because of some misinterpretation, some maybe suboptimal behavior, and so on. It's this very specific contextual once kind of situation that just ended in failure. It's not the person who is in any shape or form a failure. So the next thing that the course touched on, which I found very interesting, is the difference between acquisition and application. Do you remember it? Do you maybe want to touch on that?
The way it didn't really stand out to me when I reviewed the model, it popped up again. And yeah, learning in itself, getting facts in your brain, or taking new things in is one thing. But then applying it, living it, it's different skills, and it's something different. Just because you know something doesn't mean you can translate it and incorporate it in your life.
Just an unrelated example, but that might kind of illustrate, if you learn a language, you might do very well, let's say, if you're taking French, of passing your grammar test in school about French that just tests this one little thing about grammar during the test and things like that, and you can prepare of it and you know these sample things. But it's a completely different thing now to go out there and speak French with a Frenchman, or being in an immersive French environment. That's a completely different thing, because it's an amalgam of all the things that you should be learning and having available at the top of your fingertips. And so the acquisition versus the application. I don't think we need to be that.
No, but it ties really nicely into the action planning, because the insight from a coaching session, that's the acquisition, that's the learning. And then the end strong, the planning, that's where you anchor and make sure you have a plan to apply it and integrate it in your life. So it's not a separate thing.
Well, I don't know. It depends on the circumstance, because I could very well see that, there might be the insight planning bit, but then there might be a bit of deliberate practice. We talked about deliberate practice in one of the previous kind of things, because the course also here touched on the concept of desirable difficulties. Whether you do this now together with your coach, if that's appropriate, or in very specific practice sessions where you try to reenact role play, practice saying out loud, or enacting really this newfound knowledge. And this concept of desirable difficulties is to make this deliberate practice as tricky, complex, real world, challenging as it can be, because in that very protected mode, you can take a different kind of risk, and you can really explore, and you might give yourself much more permission to make mistakes and challenge yourself. The more you practice the challenges and difficulties in there, the more then you're able to A, recognize, and B, enact these newfound ways of thinking and acting in real life when the real situation hits. And there's the range of scenarios that you consider, the complexity of scenarios, the really messy ones that might never really happen in real life, but once you have practiced them and considered them, it makes the in real life application, I think, easier. And there was a quote by John Hattie, the inventor of visible learning, or the owner of visible learning. He said, "A teacher's job is not to make work easy, it is to make it difficult. If you're not challenged, you do not make mistakes. And if you do not make mistakes, feedback is useless." So really try to push yourself during these very deliberately set practice sessions, whether it be with your coach or in some other context. Is that something you have experience with, Suzanne?
I think it speaks again to the Goldilocks zone. Find your stretch zone. Yeah, you need to be uncomfortable to try something new, and it shouldn't be too big to be overwhelmed. Yeah, that's really ties. And I think it as well, what you just said earlier, the deliberate practice can and should be part of the action planning. Where do you practice? And the first step might not be real life. It might be right in the coaching session that the coach took you through, okay, let's role play.
Yeah. I know that, for instance, I once had the privilege of coaching a dean of students, and she had just been promoted, or she had just been promoted from some dean of students to a university director position. And she had a really hard time with saying no to her previous role. And the people that kept coming to her, for her old role kind of things. And I remember I'm helping her as a coach through this. And in that coaching session, we wrote email responses that she could use. She practiced saying out loud how she would react if somebody were to approach her with this kind of monkey on the back, as they, if you remember that analogy. And so that was a very business coaching kind of scenario where we talked specifically to this one thing. So we didn't need to go deep into values and things like that. It was very specific towards this one thing. But she walked out of there and she had changed her approach, her thinking regarding why she should do this, what was in the best interest of her new role, what was in the best interest of abdicating a little bit the things of her old role, because she couldn't do it justice anymore, because now she was focused here, right? And so it was really quite interesting. And so, yeah, practice already during the coaching session, but sometimes you might need to go out and practice with your team or some other support system. Actually, there was a little bit of information here given how we could make this practice a little bit more challenging. We can vary the scenarios and the things that we look at. We can space them out in time, which is always a good idea anyway, to do some spaced repetition or just spaced practice. Interleaving, don't do A, and then practice B, 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 but go A, B, and then C, and then back to A, and then to D, and so on, to build in this kind of flexibility and not needing the previous bit of information to lead you into the next bit of behavior, and so on. And then always summarize in your own words, make it really your own, integrated into your own mental model. and then, they gave a caveat about this, feedback of success can be counterproductive. And is that something that kind of surprised you, Suzanne?
No, I have experienced it with my team. Getting the feedback, you only come when I'm doing something wrong. So really the craving of tell me that I'm doing something good, because then I feel valued.
Yeah.
So then for me, it's how can I shift the mindset that if I go to somebody and provide feedback, and not that they did something bad, but there's areas where they can improve, it's seen as negative and somehow tied to their identity, work output. So finding the balance, and I think big as well, knowing each of your staff, what do they need? And some do need more external validation.
Yeah, I think that it's a matter of balance here, because we all have run across the clients that need this constant reassuring. Am I doing this right? Is this right? Am I doing this right? And they can't function without it, because they need this kind of, this permission essentially from somebody else to go ahead and do something. So I think it just takes a nuanced understanding from the side of the coach to recognize what's what. And, if it becomes too much of a crutch, this need really to always get acknowledgement or get confirmation about behavior, that to then address it if it really becomes crutch. So, actually, I have very much replaced the word feedback with guidance lately. Because feedback, like mistakes and failures, has sometimes become associated with these negative things. So, guidance sometimes takes a little bit of the heat off. Good. And the next thing, we actually came into the bulletproof action steps. And I think that was the practical how-to, essentially, that was given. And I'm actually going to show here the extended version of this thing, if I can find my share screen button again. Thank you. There we go. And it's kind of like a sequence of questions that lend itself really to close off a session, or maybe even a longer engagement. And I think that it goes from capturing these insights, because we find here again some of these elements that we have already touched upon, capturing the insights and learnings, putting action steps in place and prioritizing them. And as we go down a path, it really helps to anticipate these obstacles and maybe think, okay, if that happens, how would I react? If this other thing gets in the way, what possible options do I have to get around that? And then, the reflective piece is, how can I reflect on the success or maybe suboptimal outcome of what I have tried on this path, capturing the learning as we go along. And then again, there's this accountability bit where you try to really get a yay or nay on the accountability and commitment part. And we all are looking for the hell yes, and not the yeah, okay, let's try that. We want to, like, at least at that moment, have kind of this emotionally linked excitement towards it. Suzanne?
Yeah, and I think this captures the the earlier concept of action and reflection cycle where the learning occurs, and formalizes it to have an action plan. And in it, it's the capturing the learning after the action, have time or build time in to reflect and adapt, because we know it's rare that the first try of something new will be perfect.
Yeah. So I think that giving this was nice because it gave kind of the structure and re-emphasize also for many coaches not to get stuck for time, but actually plan for this wrap up of a session or a slightly longer engagement, because this is also a very important part, because the results of coaching, and this is just linked with the whole idea of insights in a session only getting you so far. What really makes coaching successful or not is what happens in between the sessions. It's the work that the client does on practice, on integrating it into real life, and on reflection. The work happens there, and hopefully these kind of approaches are going to help the client withstand that and keep it up, keep going with it, especially when the going maybe starts to get tough.
Yeah. And I think this is something that it was captured there, to build into the action plan what might be obstacles, and then what can you do if you see them, to not just stop, but be able to continue to reach the goal you want to reach.
Yeah. And there's obviously obstacles or situations that can happen that we didn't plan for, but at least always staying open for the fact that all of this is an in the moment dance, and something we just try to do our best at anyway and experiment. So I think
maybe just one piece. Just last week, I did lunch and learn now 2 years ago, created a little workbook, and it was all around the Be Safe and Certain model from Laurie Shook. So what triggers your limbic system, and then brain care, what can you do to deliberately increase your prefrontal cortex capacity, what drains your prefrontal capacity, just create awareness. And yeah, just last week somebody talked to me, says, well, I always knew it, but having it presented that way and having to write it down, having sort of a table, what fills me up, what drains me, that stuck with me. And to today, it helps me in whatever situations going forward. So I think that was really an aha for me, that some exercise where people reflected, wrote it down, was already enough without even having an action plan. But they were able to capture that and apply the learning to all kinds of situation in life.
Yeah. And actually, I think that it's sometimes really important to do that in a coaching session. Literally have the client sit down and do it right then and there. Even if you as the coach do nothing else but just hold the space and the silence for 5 or 10 minutes. Because we all know how it goes when it says, oh, I'll do it later. And then the stress and demands of just reality hit, and later never comes. So sometimes then I think it's not at all counterproductive or whatever to do that right then and there, because not the whole coaching hour does necessarily need to be talking. The work is in reflecting and figuring things out. And if that takes an in the moment kind of planning and writing and reflecting, then that's perfectly okay. It just needs to make sense for that client in that session.
Yeah. Well,
Good.
and we all know that writing, and especially handwriting, it's anchored differently in your brain. More areas of your brain are active. Even handwriting compared to typing, it's a different thing. And language has a different imprint as well, if you can verbalize something. So it really integrates already the learning just by writing things down.
And sometimes I actually, if I do coaching one-on-one, sometimes I hand my client a really big fat marker and I have him or her write the keyword, the highlight of the session, big on a flip chart. Because it just, again, emphasizes these big strokes and the big, bold visual and the kinesthetic element of it, while then they stand back and maybe read what they wrote, so that all these different ways of interacting with this idea come to life. On top of that, too, is always imagining, of course, the future outcome, the already successfully completed outcome. How does that feel like? How does that present itself? This kind of concretizing of the vision, or this imagining of the already achieved goal. So just coaching 101 on many of these things, but to see it in a framework is nevertheless quite interesting. And so that was actually what was most of what was covered in the actual module slides. What else stuck out for you, maybe from the community or other discussions that you might have had?
I don't think there was anything big. I really like these bulletproof action steps as a framework to end strong.
Yeah. And again, it covers some. Maybe you can leave one or the other out. It depends on the situation. Again, these are just frameworks and proposed models. It's not necessarily an exactly as questionnaire that you have to go through, but it gives a structure in how to proceed.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this was really great. I did appreciate this week to look at this again, because it has been pretty much a year since we completed this. I can't believe how time flies.
Yeah.
But so thank you so much, Suzanne, for
Welcome.
this. If you do not have anything else you would like to share, I would close the session.
No, yeah, just thank you as well to just hold the space to do this and come well prepared with slides and key learnings to make it hopefully for the viewers worthwhile session to watch.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, for me, if I hadn't scheduled this, probably in the whole workload of last week, I might not have taken the time to review this. So this is a great opportunity. And for everybody else out there who takes courses, doing learning integration, things like this is a very nice thing. So thank you, everybody. If you found value in what you heard here, please show us some love by subscribing to the channel, liking or leaving a comment, engaging in any form or fashion. If you have questions, you always can find at least me. And if you have a question for Suzanne, I can pass the question along to her. So thank you very much. And I will see you in a couple of weeks for Module 6.
Awesome.
Take care.
Bye-bye.